What are you making now, Daddy?
Hello everyone, going to do another video project now, but not wood turning this time. I'm going to do some knife making. I've made quite a few knives over the years, and it's something I really enjoy doing, but I've not made one for probably a year now, and it's something I'm quite excited to have another go at. And what spurred me on to doing it was I got sent this by my friend Alan Simpson in Ireland. And it's a piece of Irish bog oak. This is has been dated by dendrochronology, which is an incredibly accurate way of dating wood, and it's over 1,000 years old, this bog oak, and I'll put the exact details in the description as to how old it is. But dendrochronology is where they date it by counting the rings and measuring the ring sizes, and it's incredibly accurate. It's the most accurate way of dating wood. But that's Irish bog oak, genuine Irish bog oak from Ireland, and it's a beautiful piece of wood. There's a few shakes in it, so I'm going to have to select where I cut it to get my knife handle. But it's, you know, a very good knife handle material when it's dry, and this is bone dry, so it's perfect. Now, for this very special piece of wood, I had to select a special blade, one befitting it really, and this is it. This is a Poul Strande blade. Poul Strande is a very well-known Danish knife maker. And this is a hand forged blade, sort of Nordic style, and it's a stick tang. It's got rustic finish. You know, these are beautiful blades. There's PS's maker's mark on there, and it really is a stunning piece of metal. Really, it's been beautifully forged, and I'm looking forward to building a knife with this blade. It's a short knife, sort of 50 to 60 millimeter long blade, nice curve to the blade, so it's ideal for doing craft work, wood carving, leather work, and I'm going to use the Irish bog oak to make the handle. So the first thing I'll do is put a bolster on it out of this brass. I'll cut it out of this brass, which has been used many times for different things. And it's going to be an angled bolster because the shoulders of the blade are cut at an angle rather than straight across there at an angle. So I'll fit a bolster of brass on there, and the rest of the blade will be the Irish bog oak. I'll probably shorten this tang slightly just so that it's all hidden within the oak. But there we go, that's the introduction to the project. It's going to take a while. I'll have to do it bit by bit, but there will be a couple of follow-up videos hopefully to this, which you should find interesting as well. The first thing I do is file the shoulders square. I've got leather liners in my vice jaws. It's hard work filing these because the metal is very hard, but I want them nice and perpendicular to the long axis of the knife so that the bolster sits nicely. These hand forged blades have a few irregularities, and the next thing I need to do is just remove a couple of thicker parts from the tang so that the bolster will slide over it down onto the knife without leaving any gaps. So just working on this, and as I turn it round I take the liners out of the vice jaws and I'm filing off these irregularities on the tang. You can see in this light the two different metals where the a sandwich technique was used in forging this blade. I've cut out a rectangle of brass from that brass bar, which I'm using to make the bolster. I've put that in my machine vise, and I'm using my drill press to drill out a slot to allow the tang to run through the bolster. I'm then using very fine little files to join up the holes and flatten them and make a perfectly rectangular hole that will fit the tang. Takes a little bit of time, this bit. You don't want to overcut it because you don't want any gaps. It's got to be really snug on the tang and against the knife blade. Well, there I am, just fitting the brass on there and tapping it down. I had to thin the tang a little bit because the tang was actually slightly thicker in the middle than it was towards the blade, which you often get with these rustic blades, you know, these hand forged blades. It just takes a bit of fine tuning, and I have to keep taking the brass off and refining the slot and then tapping it back on until it's absolutely snug with no gaps around it. This is it almost done. I did get it slightly better than this in the end, but there we are. I've taken the brass off, and the next job is to smooth it. I smooth both sides, but I leave one side flat but rough. The other side I smooth and smooth using finer and finer grades of wet and dry. And I then use a buffing wheel on my lathe. This is the fine buffing wheel which I'm just finishing off the polish, but I actually used two other wheels with slightly coarser polishing compound to get to this point. Just use my mole grip pliers to hold it, and just buffing that up to a fine polish. I've cut out a spacer from African Blackwood, and I've cut it so the angle matches the bolster and then squares up, ready for the actual bog oak handle. And here I've marked it out and I'm drilling through to create a slot for the tang. I've got it in my machine vise. There you see it, the slot's all ready for the tang. I used a little hand rasp to get the slot the correct shape. And there's the bog oak block which I got from that bog oak billet. I cut it down and I found a bit without any cracks, you know, checks in, and I got it all nice and square on the sander, just marking out where the tang is. And here I'm angling it on my drill press in the machine vise so that I'm drilling at the correct angle to drill out the hole for the tang. And so I'll drill the first hole for one slope of the tang, and I then adjust it in the machine vise, check the alignment of it, and drill the next hole for the that matches the other side of the tang. Just working my way deeper and deeper into the wood. And then what I do is I move the drill bit down in the chuck so I get the correct length for the tang, and I work that in and out of that slot until I've joined up the holes at the correct depth. Just checking the alignment again and checking the depth. I've stuck the paper pattern onto the bog oak blank using some spray mount. It's a very efficient way of just sticking the paper onto these. Once I've drilled a hole out, I then use these little mini hand rasps, wood rasps, to actually refine the shape of the slot. It takes quite a bit of time and I have to keep test fitting. There, I'm just test fitting it all together, and I've drawn the design of my knife handle on that piece of paper. Just dry fitting it all together. And here I'm drilling the hole for the lanyard tube. It's a 7mm brass tube. I'm using a 7mm drill bit. I've cut out some little spacers out of red fibre liner material, which is a knife making material, and cut slots in them for the tang, and I'm just assembling this, dry fitting everything together. Before I actually glue it, I will remove the paper off the end of the bog oak, and I will sand all the surfaces to be glued with some quite coarse sandpaper on a very flat surface. I'm just doing a dry fit here, and I'm mixing up some very slow setting epoxy resin, mixing it up very thoroughly. First thing I do is glue in the lanyard tube. So I'm just making sure that hole is thoroughly wetted with epoxy. The Blackwood I cleaned with acetone. In fact, all the metal I cleaned with acetone before gluing. Blackwood, you best clean it with acetone because it's quite an oily wood and it helps remove the oils from the surface to be glued. Here I'm using a syringe to make sure the epoxy gets right down into that hole where the tang is going to go. And I'm using a little piece of lollipop stick that I've split off, and I'm getting that right down into the hole to release any air that gets trapped in there by the epoxy. I then let that settle, and I gradually keep topping it up with more epoxy. I want that hole completely full with epoxy. I don't want any air in there. I'm just releasing a bit more air and making sure there's plenty of epoxy on that end grain. I'm not in too much of a hurry to assemble these. This epoxy is very slow setting, and it just gives the epoxy chance to soak into end grain and soak into the fibre liners. I've roughened the tang a little bit, and I'm coating the tang in epoxy resin, just topping up that hole with a bit more epoxy. And like I say, there's plenty of working time. You don't want to be using fast setting epoxy. You need the working time to make sure it's all set up properly, and fast setting epoxy is not as strong or as flexible as this slower setting epoxy, and you really need maximum strength for making knife handles. Here I am just seating it all together, and I've made sure that each surface of each spacer and bit of wood has got epoxy resin on it. And I put this on my homemade knife making clamp, and making sure it's all lined up properly. And then I then use a spanner to tighten the clamp down onto the tip of the knife blade. Just checking the alignment as I'm doing this, making sure nothing's moved, making sure there's no gaps, making sure nothing's tipped. I gradually tighten this down, and here I'm just wiping away some of the excess epoxy. It's a bit less to sand away that than the next day once the epoxy's set, but I'm just wiping that away. In this shot you can see my knife making clamp, and I'm just giving it a final bit of compression, just tightening those nuts up with a spanner. Right, so this is where we're up to now. It's the slow setting epoxy's had overnight to set, and there it is. You can see that's my diagram that side, and there's the Irish Bog Oak, African Blackwood, brass bolster, and we've got the two red fibre liners in between them, and there's the lanyard tube which I almost forgot to glue in. But that's it, and what we're going to do next, flatten off this side on the belt sander, and then cut off the using the bandsaw. I'm going to cut off the bits I don't need, shape it as much as I can on the bandsaw, and then it'd be a case of profiling the handle on the belt sander and by hand sanding and filing, and it'll take a long time, this next bit, but it's quite enjoyable. It's lovely as you see the wood appear. But there you are. I shall see you in a little while. Well, I'm in from my workshop, and there's the next stage done. I've sanded both sides off. I've put it through the bandsaw, and I've put a little bit of shape. I've done a tiny bit on the sander, just starting to smooth the edges. It's difficult to show you my band, so I've got such a tiny space I can't really set the camera up to show you, but really I'm just running it round using my pattern and chopping bits off here and there to achieve that. And then I'm going to put it on the belt sander, and when I'm doing the belt sanding I'll be doing sort of roll sanding to take off the corners. At this stage, I know it sounds odd, but you try and keep everything square and true, because that way you make sure that you're making the knife handle even. But it's come out nice, no gaps, it's all perfectly lined up. And the grain in the African Blackwood, I don't know if you can see that because it's not going to focus, I don't think. No, but the grain in the African Blackwood actually lines up very well with the grain in the Irish Bog Oak. They complement each other very well. So I'm pleased with that, but yeah, it's going to be a little bit of time now, just messing about sanding and more sanding, and then I'll show you where we get up to. But you can do all this without a belt sander. You just clamp it in the vise and just you can use rasps and files and rounding things off. Belt sanders are dangerous things to use when you're doing a knife handle like this, because it's so easy to overcut and overheat. And so quite a bit of this I will do by hand in the end, but yeah, it's going well, and I'll get back to you when I've done a bit more shaping. Done a bit more work on the handle. You can see I'm starting to take the corners off now and give it a bit more shape, and I've shaped the bolster as I want it now. I've got that nice and even, and just going to keep taking the corners off and rounding it, and I'll do that on the belt sander still a bit more yet. I will try and show you how I'm doing that. I'll give it a whirl, but yeah, it's difficult in my tiny workshop. But there we are, that's where we're at now, almost up to sort of hand finishing stage really. Once I've got rid of all the edges, then I'll go on to hand finishing. I'm now refining the shape and rolling all the edges and making it round so there's no more flat surfaces or angles. I'm doing that on the belt sander on the top of my sanding machine. And there's a little soft bit on these belt sanders between the roller and the flat bed, and you can get a little bit of compression on there, and I used that part of the belt just to round everything off. I worked my way around. You need to concentrate very hard doing this. You've got to make sure you don't catch your fingers, and you need to make sure that nothing else on the knife is touching the belt that shouldn't be. It's easy to catch the end of the blade if you're not careful or something like this, and you can destroy a really nice knife. It does remove a lot of material very quickly, so you just need to do little bit by little bit and keep checking and keep looking, make sure that you're getting a nice even pattern on there, that you know that you're not making a lopsided handle. You know, I try and keep it as symmetrical as possible. Just keep rolling it and moving it round and keep checking it. And then here I'm using the end of the belt sander, the roller, to create these concavities. We're just doing it little bit by little bit. Very easy to overdo it on one of these belt sanders. They're very efficient, and you can ruin your whole project if you're not careful. But I've done a lot of these knives now, so I've got used to the way it works really. But I've moved from one side of the belt to the other as to whichever gives me the best angle to see it and handle the blade and everything. Also note that the actual blade has been well and truly masked with masking tape. This helps protect the blade and also protect your fingers, so you're not going to cut yourself. Once I've done all I can do on the belt sander, I then switch to hand sanding, and I start by using cloth backed abrasive sort of emery cloth, and I roll that around the handle, and I'm just getting that nice round profile and getting the shape that I want. And I do this for quite a long time until I get everything just nice before doing the finer hand sanding. Well, here it is, ready for hand finishing now. I was wrapping cloth backed abrasive round it to remove any angles and flat spots, get it nice and round. I've got the handle to the shape and size that I want. It fits my hand beautifully. It's very, very comfortable. I mean, a knife handle has got to be you know, practical as well as look nice and feel nice, and this is just right for my hands. It's without being too big. I've got quite big hands, but yeah, I've done all the wrapping round and the sanding in this direction, and then I've started going along with the grain now, and I'm just about got rid of all the scratches created by the sanding machine and by me getting the profile right. And once you get rid of all of these scratches in this direction by sanding with the grain, then you can work through finer and finer grades of wet and dry, or whichever is your favoured sanding medium. And I go right up to 5000 until the brass has lost all its scratches and polished. Once that's polished, you know the wood's polished really. And keep inspecting it, making sure that you've got rid of all scratches from the previous grade. If you haven't, then go back a grade or 2 grades until you do. It can take a long while, this next bit. It looks just about finished, but when you look closely it needs a bit more work. But then it'll be ready for oiling. So I'll show you when it's ready for oiling. Well, an hour later, and there it is. All hand finished, right up to 5000 grit. I even used a little bit of 12,000 micro mesh, which I just used on the brass there. But it's absolutely stunning. I don't know if you can see the shine on that, but that bog oak comes up as shiny as the Blackwood, which is quite amazing. The finish you can achieve on that bog oak is something else. Yeah, it's very hard and, you know, it's quite tricky to work, but I mean, it's just beautiful. You can see the grain, the end grain there. That has come up really nice. Very pleased with that. That's all ready for oiling, and I'm going to use a bit of Liberon's finishing oil. There are proper knife handle oils, but I quite like this. Works well. No doubt someone will tell me it's not the right stuff, but it seems to do okay. But I will put several coats of this on. The first coat you leave to soak well in, and then wipe off, let it dry, and I'll probably have to just sand back a tiny bit with very, very fine paper, just to get the shine back if it raises the grain slightly. But I don't think it'll need much work. But it's absolutely beautiful, this bog oak. I love it. I've made quite a few knives, and this is my favourite of all of them. I really, really like how this has come out. And talking of bog oak, there you are. That's what the inside looks like. That is what you call internal checking. No, not really visible on the end, but it's all inside. You can see that great big void inside, and there's quite a bit of that going on in this bog oak, so I had to be really careful about which bit I selected, which is why it was cut into such a neat block. The blank for the handle was, and all sanded smooth and square. It's much easier to prepare if it's all smooth and square, because you can get your angles right and prepare it, but it's also a good way of checking to make sure there's no cracks in it. You don't want to spend hours working on a knife handle to find it's cracked. There we are. Just let you have another look at that. And And that's, next time you see it, it'll have been oiled. It might look slightly duller once it's oiled after the first coat, but after several coats I'll buff it up, and you know, I can put it on a buffing wheel once I'm happy that the oil's done its job, and it'll come up like glass, I think. Well, here's the finished knife. Well, almost finished. It's going to need a few more coats of oil on the handle, and when it's all dry it'll be buffed up on a wheel just to get it really nicely shiny. And also, once I've finished the handle, I will just refine the blade a little bit, you know, use a leather strop or some probably Japanese Waterstones, and then a leather strop just to get that up to a really keen edge. It's pretty sharp now, but could be just slightly improved on. There you go. It's a Poul Strande blade with Irish Bog Oak handle with a Blackwood spacer, brass bolster and red fibre liners. Something very satisfying about knife making. I think it must be something within us all, this desire to make tools and things, and I think it's something that if you like making things, and especially making things out of wood and metal, have a go, try it, it's really satisfying. But yeah, probably start with a stick tang knife, something similar to this, because they're a bit more straightforward than full tang knives. There's a lot more stages involved with a full tang knife. I'll probably do a video on those at some point, but there's a lot of good videos on the internet about those. I particularly recommend Sandy's channel. He's got Jacklaw Knives, and fantastic knives he makes, absolutely stunning bushcraft knives. And there's Lee from LB Custom Knives. He does some lovely knives as well, but there's loads and loads of good knife making channels on the internet, so have a look. But there we are. Wood turning next video, and there will be a couple of follow-ups to this. I'll be making a leather sheath for this at some point. Thanks ever so much for watching. Please like, share and subscribe, and I shall see you all soon. Cheers.
More videos coming soon.